Have you ever thought about what would happen if a horse tried to save the British crown? This is the true story of Arthur Finch and Valor, a partnership that would change everything on a fateful morning in London. The sound of hoofbeats echoed across the training grounds as the morning mist hung heavy over Hyde Park. Arthur Finch straightened his red tunic. The gold braiding caught the early morning light that came through the old oak trees. He looked great on his horse at 25, but behind his stoic face was a weight that could have crushed him. 3 overdue hospital bills crumpled up in his jacket pocket were a constant reminder that his mother's cancer treatment was draining him of money. His low pay as a Royal Guard barely covered rent, let alone the growing medical bills. Formation left. Sergeant Major Harrison yelled, his voice cutting through the cool October air. Arthur led Valor, his assigned household cavalry horse, to stand next to the other mounted guards. The black gelding moved exactly how Arthur wanted it to, with every muscle responding to his subtle commands. But today felt different. Valor's ears kept twitching and turning, like radar dishes picking up signals that only he could hear. At first, everything went well during the training session. They practiced the ceremonial formations they would do during the Trooping the Colour ceremony, which would be a big event that millions of people around the world would see. Arthur had done these moves hundreds of times before, but today he kept thinking about the stack of unpaid bills on his kitchen table and how weak his mother's voice had sounded during their phone call the night before. Dr. Pemberton had said, "We need to talk about your mother's next treatment cycle, Arthur," in a tone that was carefully neutral. "The insurance coverage has reached its limit, and the experimental therapy we talked about costs £15,000 per session. Without it..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Arthur noticed a tourist with a professional camera taking pictures from behind the fence that marked the property line. That's not strange at all. Photographers came to Hyde Park every day, especially when the Royal Guards were training. The man looked to be in his 40s or 50s and was wearing an expensive leather jacket. He also had camera equipment that was probably worth more than Arthur's monthly salary. But Valor was getting more and more upset with him. The horse's behavior began in a subtle way. A nervous sidestep here and a worried snort there. Arthur could feel Valor's muscles getting tense under the saddle, like a spring that was about to break. Valor's head kept turning toward the photographer, but the other horses stayed calm and did their formations perfectly. "Easy, boy," Arthur said softly as he leaned forward to pat Valor's neck. Even though it was a cool morning, the horse's coat felt wet with nervous sweat. "What's making you scared?" The photographer walked along the fence line to get different angles. Valor got more and more upset every time he raised his camera. The horse started to prance, making it hard for Arthur to keep the formation. Sergeant Major Harrison's sharp eyes saw everything. "Finch! Control your mount!" The command rang out across the training ground, making the other guards look. Arthur tightened his grip on the reins and used his legs to gently push Valor down to keep him steady. But the horse seemed to be looking at something that only he could see. The photographer changed the focus of his telephoto lens to get a better look at the guards' movements, their formations, and their timing. He seemed especially interested in writing down the security procedures, the routes they took, and the areas where they couldn't see. Valor made his move then. The horse suddenly lunged forward, breaking formation with a huge amount of force. Arthur held on to the saddle as Valor ran straight at the photographer, who was standing next to the fence. The man looked up from his camera just in time to see almost 1,000 pounds of muscle and willpower coming at him. "Valor, no." Arthur pulled on the reins with all his might, but the horse seemed to be acting on some kind of primal instinct. The photographer fell backward, and his expensive camera gear fell to the ground as he tried to get out of the way of the horse. Valor came to a screeching halt just inches from the fence at the last second. His nostrils flared, and his eyes were wild. The photographer had fallen backward because he was in such a hurry to get away. He had dropped more than just his camera in his panic. He found a sleek black smartphone on the grass with its screen still glowing from whatever app he had been using. As he rode up, Sergeant Major Harrison's voice boomed, "What the hell was that about?" His face was red with anger and shame. "Finch, this is completely unacceptable." Arthur got off his horse quickly and shook his hands as he tried to calm Valor down. The horse was still staring at the place where the photographer had been. Now it was backing away and angrily pointing at Arthur while yelling something about lawsuits and dangerous animals. But Arthur's attention was drawn to the phone that was lying in the grass. He had to pick it up for some reason. A video player on the screen was paused in the middle of a frame, showing what looked like security footage from inside Buckingham Palace. Arthur's heart sank when he saw places that tourists shouldn't be able to get to. The timestamp on the video showed that it was new, and when I scrolled through the phone's contents, I found folder after folder of videos like this one. Arthur yelled to Harrison, "Sir, I think you need to see this," but when Harrison looked up, the sergeant major and the mysterious photographer were both gone. Arthur was busy on the phone, so he didn't see that the other guards were already going back to the stables. Their training session was over. Valor nudged Arthur's shoulder with his nose, which looked like it knew what it was doing. The horse's breathing was back to normal, but Arthur had never seen the horse's smart dark eyes look so alert before. It seemed like Valor understood how important what they had found was much better than Arthur did. Arthur put the phone in his pocket and got ready to take Valor back to the stables. He couldn't shake the feeling that the strange thing that happened this morning was just the start of something much bigger and more dangerous than a simple training mistake. He didn't care about his mother's medical bills anymore, he was too busy thinking about the security footage, the strange photographers, and the horse that seemed to have an almost supernatural ability to sense danger. The morning mist was clearing, but for Arthur Finch, the fog of doubt was just starting to settle in. Arthur's small studio apartment was lit by buzzing fluorescent lights. He sat hunched over his kitchen table at 2 in the morning, holding the mysterious phone in his hands like a piece of forbidden knowledge. It had been impossible to sleep since the event at Hyde Park 3 days ago. He saw Valor's wild charge and the photographer's scared face every time he closed his eyes, but the pictures he had found on this device were even more haunting. Arthur kept watching video after video, and each one was worse than the last. There were restricted hallways that tourists never saw, private entrances that only senior staff used, and close-up shots of emergency evacuation routes in security footage from inside Buckingham Palace. The date and time on each file were recent, with some being from just a few days before the training accident. His hands shook when he realized how big what he was looking at was. He stopped a video that showed the exact placement of security cameras during a recent state dinner and whispered to himself, "Jesus Christ." The video was shot from a number of different angles, which suggests that a group of people had access to very secret areas. Arthur's military training kicked in as he started to look at the videos with tactical precision, noting guard rotations, blind spots, and timing patterns that could only be useful for one thing. The next morning didn't help. Arthur had asked Colonel Matthews, his boss, for an urgent meeting. He had a phone and a long report that he had typed up all night. As Arthur laid out his evidence and talked about Valor's behavior and the link to the suspicious photographer, the colonel's office in Wellington Barracks felt very cold. "Sir, I think we're looking at a serious security breach," Arthur said, his voice steady even though he was tired. "These videos show areas inside that no civilian should be able to get to. Someone is planning something for the Trooping the Color ceremony." Colonel Matthews looked at the phone, and at first, Arthur thought he was worried, but as time went on, the older man's face changed to something that made Arthur's stomach drop. The colonel put the device down on his polished desk and leaned back in his leather chair, looking at Arthur with cold, calculating eyes. Finch, when was the last time you slept well? Arthur was surprised by the question. Your mother's illness, your money problems, and the stress of your job here. It's normal for someone to see threats where there aren't any. Sir, with all due respect, this isn't about stress. These videos are real and show. Matthews cut in and said, they show tourist footage that anyone with a telephoto lens could have taken. His tone became dismissive. Your horse got scared by a photographer, and now you're making up crazy conspiracy theories. This is classic paranoid behavior, son. Arthur felt the ground move under his feet. But sir, the security footage from inside the palace, the close-ups of. Enough? The colonel's voice cut through Arthur's protests like a knife. I'm recommending that you get a psychological evaluation right away. You're clearly suffering from an acute stress reaction, which could be PTSD from your time in Afghanistan. Until our psychiatric team clears you, you're not allowed to work. The words hit Arthur like punches. He couldn't believe what he was seeing as he watched his career and his mother's last chance for treatment fall apart before his eyes. Sir, please, let someone else look over these files. If I'm wrong, then fine, but if I'm right. Finch, you're free to go. Report to Dr. Whitmore tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. And leave that phone here. We'll give it back to its owner. Arthur left Wellington Barracks in a daze. His security pass had already been turned off, and his uniform felt heavier than armor. As he walked back to his apartment, the streets of London seemed to blend together. He felt like a failure. His mother's next round of treatment couldn't happen without his military pay. No one would listen to his warnings about the ceremony if he didn't have any credibility. That night, Arthur found himself outside the Royal Mews, drawn by an unexplainable need to see Valor. Arthur had known the night guard, a grizzled sergeant named O'Brien, for years. He felt sorry for him and let him visit the stables for a short time. As soon as Arthur walked into the dark building, Valor's head popped up over the door of his stall. Arthur remembered the horse's dark eyes being alert and smart, but now there was something else, something that made his skin crawl. Valor nickered softly, which sounded like an old friend saying hello. Arthur whispered, "They think I'm crazy, boy," as he slowly walked up to the stall. Valor stretched out his neck and nuzzled Arthur's hand in a way that was very gentle. "Maybe I am. Maybe the stress finally got to me." But Valor's actions showed that he was not. The horse moved around a lot in his stall, sometimes looking toward the end of the stable block where the ceremonial tack was kept. Arthur looked where he was looking and saw something strange, a small red light that was barely visible in the shadows near the feed bins. Arthur's heart raced as he got closer to look into it. A small electronic device, no bigger than a matchbox, was hidden under a pile of horse blankets. It had a tiny LED that pulsed in time with the beat. Arthur had seen similar devices while serving in the military. They were high-tech listening devices used for spying. He said, "My God," as he carefully took the device out. The implications hit him like a wave. Someone had been listening in on conversations in the stables for a long time. They knew everything about his discovery, his meeting with Colonel Matthews, and everything else. Valor went to the back corner of his stall and started to dig in the straw. Arthur looked more closely and saw another device, this one on the bottom of the feed trough. He found 3 more electronic bugs hidden around the stable area, as he searched in a more organized way. He realized it with terrifying clarity. The network was real, it was big, and it reached high enough in the military to include his boss. Colonel Matthews didn't ignore his worries because he thought Arthur was crazy, he did it because he was in on the plot. Arthur put the devices in his pocket and looked into Valor's smart eyes. The horse had been trying to warn him from the start, sensing dangers that people didn't see. He had no idea how deep their bond was, and now they were the only ones who knew what was going to happen. Arthur whispered, "We're on our own now, aren't we?" as he stroked Valor's neck. The horse put his forehead against Arthur's chest, which felt like a promise between warriors getting ready for battle. Arthur knew that his old life was over when he left the stables that night. He wasn't a royal guard anymore, which meant he didn't have a bright future or a steady income. He was now a man who was unstable, cut off from official channels, and had nothing but the trust of a horse and the burden of a terrible secret. Arthur thought as he walked through the empty streets of London that the most unlikely partnerships were made in the darkest hours and the most desperate situations showed the most true courage. It was only 5 days until the Trooping the Colour ceremony. As Marcus Webb changed the brightness on his many computer monitors, each showing a different part of his huge digital empire, the rain beat against the windows of a converted warehouse in East London. At 43, Webb looked like a normal person with wire-rimmed glasses and a well-groomed beard, but his eyes were as intense as those of a man who had spent the last 4 years carefully planning his revenge on the institution that had ruined his life. Marcus Webb used to be the BBC's best investigative journalist. He was known for his fearless investigations into corruption in high places. His documentary series Crown Secrets won 3 BAFTAs and made him known as a man who could find out things that other people were too scared to talk about. But that was before 2019, before the story that took everything he cared about. The investigation began in an innocent way. Webb had heard rumors about problems with money in the royal household's charitable foundations. There were claims that some of the money meant for veterans' care had been used for personal purposes. He had spent 8 months following paper trails, talking to people, and putting together what he thought was a strong case. The investigation that made him a legendary truth-teller and a respected journalist would have been his best work. But everything fell apart just 24 hours before the documentary was supposed to air. His main witness, a former royal household employee, suddenly changed his story, and said he had made up everything. The financial documents that Webb had carefully checked turned out to be very good fakes. Witnesses went missing or changed what they said overnight. The BBC's legal department freaked out, took down the documentary, and started an internal investigation that found Webb had been the target of a complicated hoax meant to make the company look bad. In just one terrible week, Webb lost his job, his reputation, and his credibility. People in the journalism industry, who had once praised his bravery, now whispered about how gullible and less smart he was becoming. Publishers cancelled book deals, speaking engagements disappeared, and friends stopped answering his calls. 6 months later, his wife, Sarah, left him and moved in with her parents in Scotland with their 8-year-old daughter, Emily. Webb said to himself as he looked at the social media profiles of his followers, "They played me perfectly. But now it's my turn to play with them." It didn't happen overnight that he went from being a respected journalist to a conspiracy theorist. Webb had been drinking and feeling sorry for himself for months when he found something that changed everything. He found patterns in the timing of his sources' retractions, financial problems in the shell companies that made the fake documents, and communication records that showed coordination at the highest levels of government while looking into his own downfall. He realized it like a bolt of lightning. He had been right about the first story. He had been right, horribly right, and the people he had been trying to expose had planned the cover-up. The hoax wasn't aimed at the BBC. It was aimed at him personally because he had gotten too close to something they didn't want anyone to know about. That discovery led to Truth Underground, Webb's blog and podcast, which now had more than 2 million followers around the world. He had learned to talk to the people who felt betrayed by the institutions they used to trust, as well as the people who were left out, the people who were suspicious, and the people who were forgotten. Webb's writing walked a fine line between real criticism and outright conspiracy theory. He mixed facts that could be checked with guesses in a way that made his readers feel like they were getting secret information. But blogging wasn't enough. Webb wanted to clear his name and get back at the royal family, and most importantly, he wanted the world to see them for what he thought they really were, a corrupt group that would destroy anyone who threatened their carefully crafted image. It took 2 years to come up with the plan for trooping the color and another year to put it into action. Webb had built a network of supporters, some of whom were angry at the establishment for real reasons, while others just wanted to have fun or feel like they belonged. The plan was beautiful because it was simple and symbolic. What better way to show how weak the monarchy was than to cause chaos during their most public ceremony, which was being broadcast live to hundreds of millions of people around the world. Webb's best work was the ultrasonic device. It was so advanced that it needed the help of Dr. Elena Vasquez, a former acoustic engineer, who had been blacklisted from defense contracts after refusing to work on weapons systems she thought were inhumane. The device could make sounds that humans couldn't hear but that made horses very upset and made them act in ways that no amount of training could stop. Webb told his close friends during one of their encrypted video calls, "The horses will panic, the guards will lose control, and the world will see the mighty British Empire reduced to chaos by a device the size of a smartphone. But more importantly, the investigation that follows will find the security holes that I've been writing about for months. They'll have to admit that their precious ceremony isn't as safe as they think it is." Webb's network had been in place in the royal household for more than a year. Kitchen workers who filmed the areas where food was made, maintenance workers who documented security systems, and even a junior aide who had access to scheduling information. Every piece of information was carefully collected and stored, painting a full picture of how the royal family ran their daily lives that would have impressed any foreign intelligence agency. Webb never would have guessed that Colonel Matthews, Arthur's commanding officer, was the one who made it all happen. He had his own reasons for wanting to see the monarchy brought down. Matthews had been passed over for promotion 3 times, seeing younger and less experienced officers move up while his own career stayed the same. His anger made him open to Webb's advances, especially when those advances came with a lot of money. Matthews had told them over a secure phone call the night before that Finch is becoming a problem. His horse somehow saw our photographer during training, and now he's asking about security footage. I've put him on hold for a psychological evaluation, but he keeps asking. "Handle it," Webb had said, his voice cold with determination. "We're too close to let one paranoid guard ruin everything. The ceremony is in 48 hours. As Webb made his last preparations for his big moment, he felt a mix of excitement and satisfaction running through his veins. The ultrasonic device was already in place, hidden among the ceremonial items that would be used during the parade. His network was set up and ready to record every second of the chaos that was about to happen. Social media accounts were ready to share the video and push the story that the royal family's security was a dangerous front. But the best part was knowing that Marcus Webb would finally have proof after years of being called a conspiracy theorist and a bad journalist. People would see that he had been right all along. The institutions they trusted were built on lies and kept going by fear. The Trooping the Color ceremony would be his way of getting back at the system that had ruined his life. It would be his greatest work of revenge. Webb smiled for the first time in a long time as the rain kept pounding against the warehouse windows. In less than 2 days, the quiet warrior he had become would finally speak loud enough for everyone to hear. The only thing left to wonder was if anyone would live through the fallout from his confession. Webb didn't know that a black gelding named Valor was pacing restlessly in his stall in stables all over London. His smart eyes were fixed on the darkness outside, sensing dangers that human technology could never see. At 4 in the morning, Arthur Finch sat on the edge of his unmade bed and looked at the pile of eviction notices on his nightstand. They were like a monument to his failures. The small studio apartment felt even smaller than usual. Since he was suspended from the Royal Guard, it seemed like the walls were closing in on him more and more. It had been 3 days since he had met with Colonel Matthews, and 3 days since forces he was just starting to understand had been systematically tearing apart his life. The call from St. Mary's Hospital came at midnight, waking Arthur up from the restless sleep that had become his only escape from reality. Dr. Pemberton's voice was very professional, but Arthur could hear the urgency that doctors try so hard to hide when they have to tell families bad news. "Arthur, I'm afraid we need to talk about your mother's situation more urgently than I first said," the doctor said, and his words cut through Arthur's sleepiness like a knife. "The latest scans show that the cancer has spread more quickly than we thought it would. Without the experimental treatment we talked about, I'm looking at weeks instead of months. The full cycle of the treatment costs £25,000 and needs to start within the next 72 hours to have any chance of working." Arthur hung up the phone without saying goodbye. His hands were shaking as he put the phone down on the table next to the eviction notices. He had no chance of getting £25,000 now, so it might as well have been 25 million. His military pay had been put on hold until he could see a psychiatrist. He had exactly £237 in his savings account, and his credit cards had been maxed out months ago to pay for medical bills. He thought it was funny that he was the only one who knew about a terrorist plot against the most protected family in Britain while he sat in his crumbling apartment and couldn't save his own mother's life. The weight of both duties felt like a physical force on his chest, making it hard to breathe and feel like he wasn't doing enough. Arthur opened his laptop for the 100th time in 3 days and looked through news sites and social media feeds for any sign that someone else had found out what he knew. There were less than 24 hours until the Trooping the Colour ceremony, and the press was buzzing with excitement. There were headlines praising the pageantry and tradition, photographers shared photos of the preparations, and royal correspondents gave detailed schedules of the day's events. But Arthur couldn't find any signs that security had been stepped up or that the authorities were aware of the threat that lay beneath the ceremony's polished surface. Webb's network had done a great job of making it look like Arthur's warnings were nowhere to be found and ruining his credibility. He had tried to reach out to reporters, government officials, and security agencies, but they had all politely turned him down or, worse, told him to get help for his mental health issues. The most frustrating part was seeing millions of people talk about the ceremony on social media in real time, knowing that it could turn into a disaster right in front of their eyes. Arthur typed and deleted warnings on different platforms, knowing that people would ignore them because he was a former guard who had been fired for mental health reasons. Arthur made a choice at 5:30 in the morning that felt like it had to happen but was also very scary. He shut his laptop, walked to his small closet, and took out his Royal Guard dress uniform. It was the same red tunic and shiny ceremonial sword that had once made him feel proud and useful. They felt like things from someone else's life, but they were also the only things he had left to do what he needed to do. Arthur had spent the day before studying every piece of information about the Trooping the Colour ceremony that was available to the public. He memorized the route, the time, and the security rules that weren't secret. He had learned how to look at defensive positions and find weaknesses during his military training. Now he used those skills to get into the event he had promised to protect. The plan was crazy and probably bad for Arthur's career, but he didn't care about the consequences anymore. If he could stop Webb from doing what he had planned, he might be able to clear his name and get enough attention or reward money to pay for his mother's care. If he failed, he would probably be arrested, court-martialed, and sent to jail, but at least he would have tried to stop a disaster that could kill innocent people. But there was something deeper and more mysterious behind all of his tactical planning and desperate calculations, his connection to Valor. Arthur couldn't go to the stables anymore, and his security clearance had been taken away, but he couldn't stop thinking about the black gelding. It wasn't just nostalgia or a professional connection. It was something that felt almost supernatural, as if their bond had created a way for them to communicate even when they were far apart. Arthur had always been a sensible person who made decisions based on logic and evidence, but what happened last week made him doubt that reason alone could explain things. Valor's behavior during training was too specific and too consistent to be explained away as random animal instinct. The horse had known something was wrong before Arthur did. It had sensed danger that humans had missed and had tried to warn him in the only way an animal could, by not talking. Now, as Arthur sat in his apartment getting ready for what might be his last act as a free man, he felt that same strange connection pulling at him. Valor was waiting in the Royal Mews, which was somewhere else in London. Arthur couldn't say why he knew this, but he was sure of it, just like he was sure of his own heartbeat. The horse knew the danger was coming just as well as Arthur did, and it might have been even more upset that it couldn't tell the people who were still focused on ceremony and tradition what was going on. Arthur's phone buzzed with a text from his mother: "Darling, I'm watching the ceremony coverage on television tomorrow. I know you'll do your duty magnificently, as always. I love you." The message was sent from her hospital room, where she was getting weaker by the hour. She still thought her son was serving honorably in the Royal Guard instead of planning to sneak into an event he had been banned from. Arthur felt terrible about lying to her about his situation, but he couldn't bring himself to tell a dying woman the truth about how ashamed and desperate he was. Instead, he typed back, "Love you too, Mum. Everything will be fine." The lie tasted bad in his mouth, but it was all he could give her at the time. Arthur got ready for the last time as the sun began to rise over London. He cleaned and pressed his uniform with military precision, checked his gear, and looked over his hand-drawn maps of the ceremonial route one last time. But most importantly, he closed his eyes and tried to feel the bond that had formed between him and Valor, a bond that went beyond words and species. "Hold on, boy," Arthur said to the empty apartment. "I'm on my way." A black gelding in a stable 3 miles away raised his head and nickered softly, as if he had heard every word. The morning of the trooping the colour ceremony was clear and cool over London. Thousands of people were already lining the parade route from Buckingham Palace to Horse Guards Parade. Arthur Finch crouched behind a maintenance shed at the edge of St. James's Park. The stolen Royal Guard uniform felt both familiar and strange against his skin. The red tunic, which used to be a sign of honor, now felt like a costume for the worst performance of his life. Arthur could see the elaborate preparations happening all over the ceremonial grounds from where he was hiding. Television crews set up their cameras at key locations, pointing their huge lenses at the route that the royal procession would soon take. Security personnel moved quickly and efficiently through the crowds, their earpieces crackling with constant communication as they kept the invisible barrier that protected Britain's most famous tradition. Arthur looked at his watch and saw that it was 8:47 in the morning. The ceremony would start at 11, so the horses would be brought out to get ready in the next hour. As he thought about Valor, who was probably somewhere in the Royal Mews, his heart raced against his ribs. Arthur had come to trust that Valor had a supernatural sense of danger more than any human intelligence. The night before had been the longest night of Arthur's life. He had spent hours going over the ceremony's schedule, memorizing the guard rotations, and figuring out the short times when security would be busy with other things. By any reasonable standard, his plan was crazy: break into one of the world's most secure events, find and disable a high-tech electronic device, and somehow stop a disaster that would be broadcast live to hundreds of millions of people around the world. But Arthur lost his sense of reason as soon as he realized that everyone in charge either thought he was crazy or was working against him. The listening devices he found in the stables showed that Webb's network had been keeping an eye on everything he did. This meant they knew about his suspension, his financial troubles, and his growing need to stop their plot. They probably thought they had neutralized him, that he was just another victim of their psychological warfare. That would be a mistake on their part. Arthur's phone buzzed with a text message that made his heart stop: "Arthur, darling, I'm already watching the ceremony coverage. The reporters are so excited about the beautiful weather and the wonderful horses. I can't wait to see you in your magnificent uniform. Love, Mum." The message had come from her hospital room, where she was getting weaker by the hour but still thought her son was serving with honor instead of getting ready for an act that would either prove him right or destroy him completely. Arthur made his move at 9:15. He had looked at the security patterns long enough to find a 30-second window when the perimeter guards switched places. This made a small blind spot near the maintenance entrance to the ceremonial area. Arthur ran across the open ground with military precision, his polished boots making no noise on the well-kept grass. Arthur felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that had helped him get through combat situations in Afghanistan as soon as he stepped inside the secure perimeter. Every sense was sharper, every move was planned, and every breath was controlled. He was no longer the disgraced guard Arthur Finch or the desperate son Arthur Finch. He was a soldier on a mission that could save lives. The royal mews was full of activity as grooms got the ceremonial horses ready for their big roles in the show. Arthur moved through the organized chaos with practiced ease, and his uniform and demeanor made him blend in perfectly with the other authorized personnel. No one asked why he was there. In the military hierarchy that ran these events, a royal guard in dress uniform could be anywhere he wanted to be. But Arthur was only interested in finding Valor. He moved through the stable blocks in an orderly way, looking at each stall with more and more urgency. Time was running out, and Webb's ultrasonic device was somewhere in this maze of horse boxes and equipment, ready to turn a party into a disaster. In the third stable block, Arthur found Valor standing alert in his stall, as if he had been waiting for this moment. The black gelding's smart eyes met Arthur's with a look that was almost human in its recognition and relief. Arthur opened the stall door without thinking and walked inside, putting his hands on both sides of Valor's strong neck. Arthur whispered, "I know, boy." His voice was almost drowned out by the sounds of people getting ready in the building. "I know you've been trying to warn everyone. But horses are only listened to when it's too late." Valor put his forehead against Arthur's chest in response, which felt like a sign that they understood each other. Arthur felt the same strange connection that had guided him through the past week at that moment, a connection that went beyond language and species. But their reunion was cut short by a sound that made Arthur's blood run cold, the high-pitched whine of electronic devices turning on nearby. Arthur turned around, trying to find where the noise was coming from with his trained ears. It was coming from the ceremonial tack room, which is where the fancy saddles and bridles that were used in the ceremony were kept. Arthur's mind raced with what this could mean. Webb's device wasn't just meant to scare the horses during the ceremony, it was also meant to go off during the preparation phase, when the horses were being saddled and bridled in close quarters with dozens of grooms and handlers. The chaos would happen right away and be terrible, with scared animals trampling anyone in their way. Arthur could hear the electronic whine getting louder, and he could see that other horses were starting to get upset. Their ears flattened, their eyes widened, and their muscles tensed as they sensed something was wrong that their human handlers couldn't see. The ultrasonic frequency would reach the level that would cause all the horses in the royal mews to panic in a matter of minutes, if not less. Arthur looked into Valor's eyes and saw not fear but a strong will. The horse knew what was going on just as well as Arthur did, and he was ready to do something. Their partnership, which had been built over weeks of training and strengthened by shared danger, would be tested at the most important times in both of their lives. "Okay, boy," Arthur whispered, his voice steady even though he was scared to death. "Let's go get the crown back." The electronic whine got louder as Arthur led Valor out of the stall, and the first horse in the distance started to scream. The race against time had begun, and everything Arthur had ever cared about, his mother's life, his own future, and the safety of thousands of innocent bystanders, depended on what happened in the next few minutes. But he wasn't doing this by himself. Beside him was a partner who had never doubted him, questioned his judgment, or stopped trying to warn the world about the danger that only they could see. They all ran toward the sound of chaos coming from the other side, ready to face whatever was waiting in the shadows of Britain's most important ceremony. At exactly 11:07 in the morning, the ultrasonic device's piercing frequency reached its highest point. This was just as the royal procession started its slow march from Buckingham Palace to Horse Guards Parade. The sound was inaudible to the thousands of people watching the ceremony along the route and the television cameras that were broadcasting it to 300 million people around the world. But to every horse within a quarter mile, it felt like having red-hot needles pierce their eardrums. Arthur could feel Valor's muscles tighten as they ran through the chaos that had broken out in the royal mews. All around them, beautiful ceremonial horses reared up and thrashed in their stalls, their eyes wide with fear as the ultrasonic frequency drove them into a primal rage. As the hooves kicked out in all directions, grooms and handlers ran for safety. Their shouts of alarm added to the noise of whinnying and crashing equipment. But Valor stayed calm, and his strong stride quickly covered the distance between the stables and the ceremonial staging area. Arthur had never felt anything like the bond he had with his horse at that moment. It was as if they shared the same nervous system, the same drive, and the same desperate need to stop the disaster that was happening around them. As he made his way through the panicked animals and fleeing people, heading straight for the source of the electronic torment, Valor's intelligence seemed almost otherworldly. "Look," Arthur yelled, pointing to a small black box under the ceremonial reviewing stand. Its LED lights were flashing quickly as it sent out the frequency that was driving every horse within range crazy. The device was small, like a smartphone, but it had terrible effects. Arthur could see the royal procession in the distance. The beautiful horses of the Household Cavalry were starting to show signs of stress as they got closer to the killing field that Webb had set up for them. Webb was in the middle of a group of official photographers, and his press credentials gave him full access to document the mess he had made. Arthur could see that the man was happy as he raised his camera to catch the moment when the ceremonial horses would bolt, trampling anyone who happened to be in their way. He wanted to record every second of the monarchy's humiliation with the ultrasonic device, which was his best work of revenge. Arthur told Valor to move on, but a huge chestnut stallion that had gotten away from its handler was blocking their way. It was rearing up and hitting the air with hooves that could crush a human skull. The animal's eyes rolled white with fear, and foam flecked his muzzle as the ultrasonic frequency kept attacking his nervous system. Valor stopped just out of reach of the wild stallion, his smart eyes fixed on Arthur with an expression that made it look like he was asking a question. Arthur knew right away what his partner wanted to know: should we go around or through? "Believe me, boy," Arthur said softly as he leaned forward in the saddle. "I know what you're capable of." Millions of people would see what happened next on social media in the days that followed, but the people who were watching the live broadcast couldn't believe their eyes. Valor walked up to the scared stallion not with anger or fear, but with a calm authority that seemed to cut through the animal's panic like a knife through silk. The black gelding stretched out his neck, and touched the other horse's forehead with his muzzle. This simple but powerful gesture made the stallion stop thrashing right away. Arthur had learned about this kind of behavior in his military animal psychology training. He learned that alpha horses could sometimes calm down upset members of their herd by touching them and using pheromones to talk to them. But seeing it happen in real life, especially in such extreme circumstances, was like seeing a miracle. As Valor kept touching the stallion, his breathing slowed down, and his wild eyes began to focus on something that looked like sanity. "Unbelievable," said one of the cameramen, who had been able to keep filming despite the chaos around him. "That horse just talked the other one out of having a full breakdown." Arthur didn't have time to be amazed by how good his partner was at things. The royal procession was less than 2 minutes away from the ultrasonic device's maximum effective range. Once those ceremonial horses started to panic on live TV, people would die. The narrow streets would turn into a death trap as half-done animals ran in all directions, and the carefully planned security cordon would fall apart under the weight of total chaos. Arthur led Valor past the now calm stallion and toward the reviewing stand, where the device kept attacking in silence. But Webb had thought this might happen. 2 men in maintenance coveralls got in Arthur's way. Their casual clothes hid the fact that they were part of the conspiracy. Arthur knew one of them from the surveillance footage he had found. It was a maintenance worker who had been filming security procedures for months. "Sorry, mate," the man said, his accent showing that he was from East London even though he seemed to be in charge. "You can't go through here. Only official business." As Arthur looked at the threat, his military training kicked in. He could see the bulge of hidden weapons under their coveralls, and both men were in a position to keep him from getting to the device. But they had made a big mistake in their tactical positioning. They were too close together, which gave Valor a small opening that the nimble horse could use to its advantage. Arthur whispered to Valor, "Remember the jump course." His voice was barely louder than the noise around them. The black gelding's ears perked up, showing that he understood. They had practiced moving through tight spaces and sudden obstacles during their training sessions to get ready for ceremonial formations that needed split-second timing and perfect coordination. The two people who were in on the plan realized their mistake just a split second too late. Valor jumped forward with a lot of force, his hooves thundering against the ground as he sped up for what could be either a perfect gap shot or a terrible crash. Arthur leaned down over his partner's neck and felt the rush of adrenaline that came with completely trusting someone else's skills. There was enough room for Valor's huge body to slide between the two men like a shadow made of flesh. Arthur felt the wind from their bodies as they dove to the side. Their shouts of alarm were drowned out by the sound of hooves and the crowd getting louder as people started to realize something was wrong. The ultrasonic device was now close enough to touch. It was mounted on a steel bracket under the main platform of the reviewing stand. Arthur could see that the LED display was showing the maximum output. The frequency curve was at the exact point where it would cause the most pain to horses without hurting people. Webb's research was very thorough, and his work was almost perfect, except for one thing he had never thought of. He never thought that a horse could actively fight the effects of the frequency through sheer willpower and working with a human rider. Most animals would run away from the ultrasonic attack or give up because of the mental stress it caused. Valor had found something stronger than instinct or training. He had found a reason to protect his partnership with Arthur. Arthur leaned down from the saddle and fumbled with the mounting bracket for the device while Valor held his ground with perfect steadiness. Arthur could feel the ultrasonic frequency as a physical pressure against his eardrums at this distance. It was like standing too close to a jet engine. But his hands stayed steady as he tried to stop Webb's weapon of mass chaos. When Webb realized what was going on, the first bolt came loose. Arthur could see the man's face change as he realized that a disgraced guard and a horse that wouldn't panic were ruining his perfect plan. Webb pushed his way through the crowd of photographers and officials, forgetting about his camera as he ran to stop Arthur from ruining 2 years of careful planning. The second bolt was harder to get off because the threads had corroded from the constant dampness in London. Arthur's grip on the metal slipped as sweat and adrenaline made it shaky. He could hear Webb's footsteps getting closer and closer, and he could see the royal procession getting closer and closer. The horses in the front of the Household Cavalry were already showing signs of distress, and their riders were having a hard time keeping them under control as the ultrasonic frequency started to affect them. "Come on," Arthur said through clenched teeth, using all of his strength to get the bolt to move. "Come on, you bastard." Valor shifted his weight a little to give Arthur better leverage while keeping his torso and legs perfectly still. Their months of training together had turned their partnership into something more than just talking to each other. They were now working together as one body with two bodies and one goal. As Webb got closer, the bolt finally broke with a loud screech. Arthur got the ultrasonic device, and its LED display flickered as the power connection was cut. But Webb wasn't done yet. With a roar of angry frustration, he lunged at Arthur, his hands reaching for the device that was his last chance to get back at the system that had ruined his life. Arthur was in a desperate fight while precariously balanced in the saddle, trying to keep his seat and stop Webb from getting the ultrasonic weapon back. But once again, Valor showed that their partnership was stronger than its parts. The black gelding started to walk in a controlled circle, using his body weight and speed to keep Webb off balance and give Arthur the stability he needed to keep control of the device. Dozens of cameras caught the whole fight because news crews knew they were seeing something that had never happened before. Later, the video would show Arthur holding the ultrasonic device high above his head and throwing it to the ground with all his might, where it broke into a dozen pieces on the concrete. The effect was instant and amazing. Panicked horses in the ceremonial area began to calm down as the torturous frequency stopped attacking their nervous systems. The royal procession moved forward with great dignity, not knowing how close they had come to disaster. The crowds cheered what they thought was part of the planned show. Webb fell to his knees among the broken pieces of his device, his face a mask of defeat and disbelief. He had never thought to include a partnership in his plans, which had taken 2 years to make, months to carry out, and a lifetime of bitterness. After their victory, Arthur felt a deep sense of completion wash over him as he sat on Valor. They had saved not only the royal family and the ceremony, but also hundreds of innocent people who would have been caught up in Webb's revenge. They had shown that trust and communication could go beyond species, situations, and even the most advanced technology. The warrior who had been silent finally spoke up, and the world was listening. The weeks after the Trooping the Colour incident turned Arthur Finch from a disgraced royal guard into Britain's most unlikely national hero. But the changes that meant the most to him were the ones that happened when cameras weren't rolling and reporters had moved on to other stories. It wasn't the medals, the praise, or the viral social media posts that made him famous around the world. It was the phone call from Dr. Pemberton at St. Mary's Hospital on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks after the ceremony that really made him feel like a winner. "Arthur, I have incredible news about your mother's treatment," the doctor said, and Arthur had never heard such excitement in his voice before. "The royal family's charitable foundation has agreed to pay for all of her experimental therapy, and we can start right away. The Queen herself asked us to give her the best care possible, and I must say, the outlook is very good now." Arthur had to sit down in his new office at Wellington Barracks because he was so relieved that he almost fell over. The office itself was a sign of how much his life had changed. He had gone from being a suspended guard facing court-martial to being the special liaison for ceremonial security, a job made just for him to use his unique knowledge of potential threats against royal events. Colonel Matthew's arrest and disgrace had left a hole in the chain of command, and Arthur's brave actions had both cleared his name and gotten him promoted quickly. Arthur felt like he could finally breathe again when he found out that his mother would live, not just survive, but thrive with access to cutting-edge treatment that had been too expensive for them before. Not only did the royal family help him with his medical bills and mounting debts, but so did the book deal, speaking engagements, and consulting opportunities that came with his sudden fame. There had been some strange moments during the change. Arthur's story was in the news all over the world, with headlines like "The Horse Whisperer Who Saved the Crown" and "Silent Partners, How Man and Beast Prevented Disaster." The viral video of him and Valor working together to disable Webb's device has been seen over 50 million times on different sites, and it has led to many reaction videos, analysis pieces, and even early talk of a Hollywood movie adaptation. But the most important recognition may have come from an unexpected source. The Queen herself asked to meet with Arthur and Valor in private, and the meeting took place in the private gardens of Windsor Castle, away from the media frenzy that followed their public appearances. Arthur would always remember the time when the Queen, who was small and graceful in her perfectly coordinated outfit, came up to Valor with real interest and a clear understanding of horses. She had said, "I'm told this amazing animal sensed danger that all of our high-tech security systems missed." Her voice had the authority of decades on the throne, but it also had a warmth that surprised Arthur. "From what I've seen, horses are much better at judging character and intention than most people. You were smart to trust his instincts." The Queen had personally pinned a medal that had been made just for Arthur onto his dress uniform, but what she did next really touched him. She took a few sugar cubes out of her purse and gave them to Valor, who took them with the same royal grace that he brought to everything he did. Arthur understood at that moment that the award wasn't just for him, it was for the partnership that had saved the day. Valor's own change had been just as amazing. The Black Gelding became Britain's most famous horse, appearing on magazine covers and in documentary specials about the event. Horse lovers all over the world studied every part of his behavior during the crisis. They were amazed at how calm he was while other animals panicked and how well he seemed to understand the feelings and intentions of the people around him. But it was in their daily work together that Arthur really saw how much their relationship had grown. Their morning training sessions in Hyde Park had turned into almost choreographed performances of wordless communication, with Valor reacting to even the smallest movements of Arthur and Arthur automatically understanding how his partner felt, and what was bothering him. Other riders and trainers found their almost telepathic connection both inspiring and a little strange. Arthur was happy in ways he had never expected about the professional opportunities that came with their fame. He had been asked to speak at military academies about how to assess threats in new ways, to talk to security firms about the problems with systems that rely too much on technology, and to work with animal behaviorists who were looking at how different species communicate with each other. Each job he took not only paid well enough to secure his family's future, but also gave him intellectual challenges that made him feel like he was making a difference in the world. Arthur felt more sorry for the man who had planned the conspiracy than angry after Marcus Webb's trial. It became clear during the trial that Webb's actions were not motivated by pure malice but by a toxic mix of real grievances, mental breakdown, and the echo chamber effect of online conspiracy groups. His 2-year fall from a respected journalist to a domestic terrorist was a warning about how anger and loneliness can change even smart, well-meaning people. The network Webb had put together was bigger than anyone had thought at first. In the end, more than 30 people were charged in connection with the plot. This included Colonel Matthews and several other military personnel who had been compromised through a combination of financial pressure and ideological manipulation. The investigation found security holes that led to major changes in how ceremonial events were protected. Arthur was now directly involved in putting these changes into action. Arthur cared most about the personal relationships that had been repaired and strengthened, even more than the professional recognition and financial security. His mother's recovery had gone better than anyone could have hoped, and their weekly phone calls were full of her excitement about getting back to the garden club and charity work that had been her passion before she got sick and lost all her energy. Arthur had even gotten back in touch with former co-workers, who had been skeptical of his claims at first, which was even more surprising. After the truth came out, a lot of them got in touch to say they were sorry for not believing him, and to praise him for not giving up even when the system told him to. These relationships, which were built on respect instead of just hierarchy, had become some of the best parts of his new job. The media attention had also opened up new romantic possibilities for Arthur that he hadn't expected. Dr. Sarah Chen, a veterinary behavioral specialist who had been consulted during the investigation into Valor's extraordinary abilities, had become a frequent collaborator and, increasingly, a personal friend whose shared passion for animal psychology created a connection that Arthur found both intellectually stimulating and emotionally satisfying. Arthur thought about how much his life had changed since he had trusted an animal's instincts over human judgment, as he sat in his office that Tuesday morning and looked out at the training grounds where this whole thing had started. Investment portfolios and charitable foundation papers had taken the place of the pile of unpaid bills that used to sit on his kitchen table. He had moved from a small studio apartment to a comfortable flat in Kensington with enough room for his mother to stay while she was in London for treatment. But maybe the most important thing was that Arthur had found a sense of purpose that went beyond just staying alive or getting ahead at work. His job now was to stop security failures that could put innocent people in danger, and his unique experience had given him knowledge that no amount of traditional training could have given him. He had learned to pay attention to more than just official intelligence reports. He had learned to pay attention to the subtle signals that animals and people with good instincts often picked up on before technology did. Arthur was thinking when someone knocked on his office door. Sergeant Major Harrison came in with the morning briefing, but he was acting very differently toward Arthur than he had 3 weeks ago. People used to look down on a guard who couldn't control his horse, but now they really respect a man who saved lives by being brave and thinking outside the box. "Sir, we've heard reports of strange animal behavior near Westminster during yesterday's parliamentary session," Harrison said, and his tone showed that he now took such reports seriously. "Nothing conclusive yet, but with what has been happening lately, we thought you and Valor might want to look into it." Arthur smiled as he grabbed his coat. It seemed that the adventure that had started with a horse acting strangely during normal training was far from over. Arthur realized that he had found more than just financial security and professional recognition as he walked toward the stables where Valor was waiting for him with his usual alertness and intelligence. He had found his true calling. The bond between man and horse, which had once seemed like a weakness in a world of advanced technology, had become their greatest strength. They were a symbol of something that no amount of electronic surveillance or bureaucratic protocol could replace, the ancient bond between species that let them sense dangers and chances that others missed. Arthur walked up to Valor's stall, and the black gelding raised his head and made a soft nicker. This was Arthur's favorite way to say hello in the whole world. They had things to do, puzzles to solve, and maybe even more people to save. The quiet warrior had found his voice, and the world was listening.